They usually mean cities' rents, mortgages, interest rates. But an experiment is happening far beyond city limits. Across the deserts and plains of the United States of America, people have traded mortgages for mobility, setting up RVs on federal land that costs nothing. It is not glamorous and it is not heavy. It is simply what affordability looks like now. This is not a fringe movement. It is a pressure release in a broken system. And it becomes much easier to understand once you've seen what happens in a desert town that transforms into something completely different for half the year. Number 5. Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. Down in the southern part of New Mexico, there is a small town where time feels slightly slowed, like somebody turned the volume knob down one notch. The streets are low and spread out. The neon looks tired rather than aggressive, and the biggest line in town might be outside a diner or a bathhouse on a weekend afternoon. It does not look like a grand plan for surviving the housing crisis. Only after a day or two do you notice how many license plates came from somewhere else and never left. The town, called Truth or Consequences, sits along the Rio Grande with old motor courts, small adobe homes, and bathhouses that still pump mineral water into tubs that outlive the signs above their doors. There is a hospital that always looks a little overwrought, a couple of grocery options, and a main drag that could use fresh paint but keeps going anyway. The real magnet is outside the official limits, in the desert that stretches north and west. Miles of land overseen by the Bureau of Land Management sit out there, marked mostly by weathered signs and the occasional cattle guard. Follow the right dirt road, and you will find flat clearings tucked into low hills, where RVs have settled in, not for a weekend, but for as long as the rules allow. On this federal land, people are relying on the same basic pattern. As long as they stay within the usual time limits, pack out their trash, keep camps small, and leaving no mess. Days there follow a simple rhythm. Morning comes with the sound of wind and the occasional distant semi on the highway. Solar panels start pulling power as the sun rises. Someone drives into town for drinking water and groceries. Another person heads in for a part-time shift at a cafe or a grocery store, while others sign into remote work over cellular hotspots, their job located only in a server somewhere. The desert does not care why you came. Winds can slam across the mesa so unexpectedly that they bend awning arms and send lawn chairs skittering away across the gravel. Summer turns every metal surface into a burn hazard. Winter nights creep below freezing, and you discover the exact spots where the insulation in your recreational vehicle is weakest. Every gallon of fresh water has to be hauled. Every gallon of waste has to be carried out and disposed of properly in town or at a legal station. Inside the town, you see the other side of the story. Some houses are clearly held by people who have been here for decades, their yards crowded with projects and old cars. Other houses are for sale at prices that would be impossible in coastal cities, yet still out of reach for anyone whose income arrives in an unpredictable trickle. A few people move from a rented room to a travel trailer to a tired RV to a tent, always trying to stay one step ahead of payments. Nobody really knows how long the balance will hold. Rules can change. Public land that feels endless can suddenly be carved up by new management plans, fire risks, or political pressure. For now, this small town and the desert that hangs off its edges show one way people are slipping around formal housing, replacing a lease with a set of printed rules at the entrance to a dirt road. And if that dusty quiet feels too slow or vulnerable, there is another place in the desert where the glow of a much bigger city is always lurking just over the horizon. Number 4. Pahrump, Nevada. Out in the Mojave Desert, the land is wide and raw until the pavement pulls you into extra-wide streets, casino signs, and houses spaced like someone scattered them by hand. Fuel stations have tall pumps for big rigs. There are signs for septic pumping, and RVs hide behind cinder block walls. Even without the name, you can tell this place understands homes on wheels. Drive around and the pattern shows itself. Large lots with fifth wheels under metal covers, storage sheds that look like spare bedrooms. Spaces advertised with monthly full hookups, others rented quietly as long-term parking with just enough power to keep the air conditioner alive. Mountains on two sides remind you this is a pocket cut out of open desert. Only later do you pin the label on it. Pahrump, Nevada. Just past the last paved streets, asphalt crumbles into gravel and then into sunburned two-track. There, the federal story starts again. The Bureau of Land Management oversees much of the surrounding desert, and in those stretches, dispersed camping is allowed under familiar conditions. You see a travel trailer set back from the road, a van tucked into creosote, a Class A recreational vehicle on a ridge with only solar panels and a short antenna breaking the line of the sky. For people living this way, town is a base, not the main event. They park on public land with no nightly charge, then slip in and out to refill water, buy food, get mail, or work part-time. The usual fixed cost in a normal life, traditional rent, has been swapped for fuel, repairs, and whatever it takes to keep an older RV functional in harsh weather. From a cramped apartment in a big city, the trade is obvious. No one here asks for a security deposit, a credit check, or proof of income just to sleep. The sun runs your solar, if the system is decent. The land is free to occupy if you are respectful and keep moving. You can be one break down from trouble and still feel less precarious than you did handing over half your income for thin walls and shared stairwells. The risks are not subtle. Summer heat can push the inside of a parked rig into unsafe territory without constant air conditioning. Windstorms drive dust into every hinge and vent. Flash floods can cut through dry washes suddenly, leaving tracks that end in gullies you can no longer cross. Enforcement pressure rises and falls with complaints from nearby owners, trash left behind, abandoned rigs, and whatever mood federal managers are in about long-running camping traditions. On some evenings, as the sky goes red and purple over the ridges, you can see the glow of Las Vegas reflecting faintly off distant clouds. That is the other pole in this local gravity field. A major city where housing is already tight and where one bad month can push people out. Some of those people end up here, hanging on to a recreational vehicle and a slice of desert because it is what remains. Others arrive by choice, certain they have outsmarted the system. For some, this is an exit. Or others, a holding pattern. Either way, the desert around this town has become a pressure valve. When conventional housing costs turn brutal, people drive out here to see how far they can stretch their resources and their luck. And for anyone who wants the same kind of escape, but with water close by and a more tourist-tuned economy, there is another place along the river where this experiment takes on a very different flavor. If any of this is starting to sound a little too familiar, this is where I want to hear from you. Drop a comment with what you are seeing on the ground, or any questions you want us to dig into next, because a lot of the strongest chapters in this series start with your story. And if this kind of slow, grounded breakdown is helping you connect the dots on what is happening outside the usual headlines, hit like so it reaches more people, and subscribe so you do not miss the next deep dive when we follow this trail a little further. Number 3. Lake Havasu City, Arizona. Imagine a wide blue band of water cutting through the desert, framed by rugged hills and backed by endless brown. Boats buzz across it, pulling people on tubes and boards. On the shore, bars and condos stack up beside one another, promising a version of life that smells like sunscreen and gasoline. If you only drove across the bridge and walked the main strip once, you might think that is all there is. Stay a bit longer, and you start to see the other crowd, older RVs tucked into side streets in winter, vans with solar panels parked on the edges of large lots, trucks towing fifth wheels that are clearly not just on a week-long trip, but carrying everything their owners own. They arrive when the weather in colder states turns sharp, and they arrange themselves in two overlapping worlds: the pay-by-the-month parks and the free spaces just beyond the city limits. Only then does the name Lake Havasu City snap into place. North of the pavement and the waterfront, the desert rises in rocky folds. Dirt roads lead into the Bureau of Land Management land that rings much of this area, and in there, scattered like islands, are pockets of dispersed camping. Some spots are famous enough to have nicknames and a long memory of stories. Others are just bare clearings discovered by someone who drove a little farther than the last person. They all share the same core idea: no nightly fee, as long as you obey the rules that govern public land. From the outside, it might look like chaos. RVs parked at odd angles, tents near travel trailers. Old school buses converted into homes with wood stoves poking out the roof. In reality, there is a rough kind of order. People tend to give one another space. Informal paths for walking dogs and hauling trash appear. A few individuals take it on themselves to pick up litter and quietly remind new arrivals how things work. Daily life here weaves free land into a lakefront economy. In the morning, generators start for the first coffee, or solar power kicks on the inverter. For someone who needs to sign into an early meeting, when the sun climbs, some residents drive into town for work in restaurants, maintenance jobs, or retail. Others head to the water with kayaks or paddleboards, taking full advantage of the fact that they are living near a resort town without paying resort prices for a bed. At night, you hear the thump of music from the strip, if the wind is right, mixed with the quieter sounds of people cooking outside their rigs and talking about the day. You also hear a different kind of conversation about which agencies are tightening enforcement, which spots are rumored to be closing, and what happened last season when a few problem camps drew unwanted attention. The sense of freedom is tempered by the awareness that it is vulnerable. Lake Havasu City shows what happens when a classic leisure destination collides with a rising wave of people who cannot or will not pay conventional rents. For some, this is a golden period, good weather, decent work nearby, and little or no housing bill. For others, it feels more like squatting on the margin of a system that has already moved on without them, a system that still expects staff to show up and clean rooms and cook food, but is not prepared to house those same staff at prices they can afford. There is still another layer to this story. Move downriver, and the water spreads out into a different pattern. Fields appear, snowbirds multiply, and the free or nearly free camping options become more organized and intense. There, the balance between official policy and lived reality looks even more stretched, especially in the colder months when the rest of the continent is freezing and the desert air here is still soft. Number 2. Yuma, Arizona. In winter, a drive through this part of the desert does not look like the classic empty postcard. Rows of green crops run in precise lines across the valley floor, fed by irrigation canals that shimmer in the sun. Tractors move slowly between fields. Roadside stands sell produce that was in the ground only a short time before. On every major road, you see clusters of RVs following the same routes as migratory birds. The town here is busy but not frantic. There are hospitals, dentists, grocery stores with carts lined up in the parking lot, and license plates from almost every northern and midwestern state. Parking lots near larger stores are dotted with rigs that look like they have been there for more than one shopping trip. In side streets and on the edges of town property, older motorhomes and travel trailers huddle together, their owners doing their best to remain unobtrusive. Eventually, somebody mentions the name Yuma, and the pattern clicks into focus. Beyond the fields and wetlands, pockets of desert fall under the Bureau of Land Management and other agencies. Some are official long-term visitor areas where, in the cool season, a single fee covers months of camping with dump stations and trash. Others are simple dispersed zones marked by small signs and a scattering of rigs on the gravel. Where camping does not cost a nightly fee, the routine is simple. Arrive, read the rules, and stay limits. Find a spot that does not crowd anyone, and settle into a life where the housing bill is effectively zero. Now and then, you run into town to refill water, dump tanks legally, buy food, or even cross the international border for cheaper medical and dental care. Many here are older, on fixed incomes that will not cover a decent apartment and still leave enough for medicine and emergencies. Others are younger, working seasonal farm jobs, warehouses, or the service work that feeds winter visitors. Some are families who decided that a used RV was more realistic than chasing an application process that demands perfect credit and piles of cash just to get keys. The setup is generous and precarious at the same time. Public land and permissive camping rules give people breathing room in a tight housing market, but that room exists only as long as politics, fire risks, complaints, and environmental rules allow it. One bad headline or policy shift can close a whole stretch of desert with very little warning. On a cool evening, with the sun dropping and the valley lights coming on, you can look across the rigs and fields and feel both relief and tension. This is a way to get through winter without traditional rent, with some community, and with real medical care nearby. It is also a way to hide how many people can no longer afford stable housing under the terms the formal market is offering. Follow that tension farther into the desert, and you reach a much smaller town that looks almost ordinary in summer, then turns unrecognizable in the cool season, as RVs fill the surrounding federal land, and a different kind of city appears, without ever showing up on a census. Number 1. Quartzsite, Arizona. For most of the hot months, the view from the highway barely registers. A few low buildings, fuel stations, billboards for rocks and jerky, and then the land slips back into open desert. It feels like a service stop, important only when you need to refill the tank. Bureau of Land Management desert stretches away in every direction, blurred by heat. Then winter hits, and it is like someone opened a hidden door. RVs trickle in, then arrive in waves. They roll off the interstate and disappear down dirt roads toward places you hear spoken like neighborhood names. High Jolly, Plumosa Road, Dome Rock. Long-term visitor areas with official maps and others that only exist because people have used them for years. The population multiplies so sharply that locals simply say it becomes another town. This is Quartzsite, and it might be the clearest example of public land living. The Bureau of Land Management controls huge tracts where dispersed camping is allowed. In some areas, you stay for a limited time without paying a nightly fee, as long as you follow the rules. In the long-term visitor areas, a single seasonal pass covers months of camping and basic shared services. Either way, the price is a fraction of what a conventional rental would demand for the same winter. Out on the desert, life quietly organizes itself. Rows of rigs face the same direction, like houses on a bare street. Circles of chairs and a fire ring mark informal town squares. Someone with tools and experience turns their site into a temporary repair shop, keeping old recreational vehicles alive in exchange for cash, parts, or favors. Most of the real economy runs on conversations and handshakes, not paperwork. Inside town, the shift is even harder to miss. Empty lots turn into sprawling swap meets, selling tools, solar panels, handmade goods, and obscure parts. A giant tent rises for an RV show where companies pitch new rigs to people already living on wheels. Restaurants stretch their hours. Clinics quietly prepare for a surge of older patients who scheduled appointments to line up with their winter stay. The stories people bring here vary, but the pattern is clear. Some sold houses in expensive states, banked the equity, and now treat this as one of several warm bases. Others slid through layoffs, medical bills, divorces, and rising rents until an aging motorhome, a seasonal pass, and careful budgeting were the only options left. A smaller group is simply testing whether a few years of almost no rent can clear debts or build savings that a normal lease would never allow. All of them depend on the same fragile setup. None own the ground under their tires. They are guests under policies that can change. They rely on the tiny town for fuel, groceries, medical care, and emergency services, even as their seasonal presence stretches those systems close to their limits. Everyone understands that a bad fire season, extended drought, or political shift could redraw the rules and make this entire arrangement shake. On a clear night, you can stand outside and see rigs circling the horizon, windows glowing softly under an open sky. It feels like a real city of wheels, but everyone knows they could be told to move in a matter of days. The sense of community exists anyway, held together by habit, necessity, and a quiet hope that this window stays open just a little longer. It is easy to call a place like this an odd exception. Listen long enough, and it starts to sound more like a preview. If rent and mortgages keep drifting away from what people actually earn, if emergencies keep chewing through savings, and if public land rules stay even partly flexible, the line of RVs pointing toward towns like this is not going to shrink. It will just change shape, shifting into new versions of the same idea that nobody has fully drawn yet. Taken together, these 5 places sketch a rough outline of a housing system under strain. In each one, federal land, local economics, and human improvisation combine to create a way of living, with little or no traditional rent, paid for in constant motion and uncertainty. The rules are real, the risks are real, and more people are choosing, or being pushed into, this path every year. Living on Bureau of Land Management land in an RV is not a magical escape. It is work, planning, hauling, fixing, and watching policy updates like weather reports. If you have lived this way near any of these towns or have questions about trying it, drop them in the comment. Hit like if this helped connect some dots, and subscribe so you do not miss the next deep dive when we follow where your stories point.